Welcome. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. The post date on the social media platform that you are watching this video on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. If you have already watched this introductory information regarding November 27th, you can skip ahead no more than precisely 10 minutes. Welcome. This video that you are watching was produced prior to November 27th, 2025, when prior to this date, it was predicted that Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel, the famous singer and songwriter, would slip and fall and severely injure his head on this November 27th, 2025 date, Thanksgiving. This is because God's signs, his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, overwhelmingly indicated that November 27th would be extremely important regarding this trail of signs leading to the date that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is now predicted to be December 19th, 2025, 22 days after November 27th. That's why the clear and relevant signs that occurred on November 27th that related to Paul Simon revealed adding 22 more days to reach December 19th. The signs we received on November 27th are explained in other videos in more detail. But for the sake of this introduction here, I will briefly describe them. But before I do, the key thing to understand here is that when Paul Simon slips and falls and injures his head on December 19th, it will prove that all of the analysis in this video for November 27th is 100% correct and true. That's the purpose of this prediction. In other words, the reason why God does this, why he lays out a trail of signs, it is in order to elaborate on the prophetic signs, because none of the prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs. It is through these connections and context that God is able to tell these stories and themes. And God does this in order to relay extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know. And everyone needs to know how and why God pointed in advance to November 27th, why he did so. And it is explained in these videos that talk about God pointing to November 27th. Now, the skeptic will say, oh, well, you know, he didn't slip and fall on that day. You were wrong. No. When the prediction comes to pass on December 19th, 22 days later, it will prove all of the analysis for November 27th. And therefore, it will prove that God was indeed pointing to November 27th regarding the slip and fall and injury of his head of Paul Simon. And therefore, all of the knowledge that's contained in these stories that were told in the lead up to November 27th are extremely important. And that's why when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they need to watch every minute of every video on this channel, including all of the videos that predicted November 27th. It was not quote unquote wrong. It was 100% correct. And that will be proven to be true when Paul Simon slips and falls and injures his head on December 19th. Now, why the 22 days from November 27th? Well, one of the signs we received on that day was the first American Pope's first trip abroad to 2 nations. And on the plane flight, the news story was that he was gifted the historic bat used by player number 2. The Chicago White Sox player number 2 was gifted to the Pope, the first American Pope, on his first trip abroad to 2 nations. There's much more to that. He was on, for example, his way to the 1700s anniversary celebration of the Nicene Creed. And on that day, one of the 2 National Guardsmen died, who was shot on 17th Street. And on, as explained in the other video. So we have the 2 and 2, number 2's bat and the 2-nation trip. The first American Pope from Chicago hints at the first black president from Chicago, and on and on. And the Pope and Obama are the 2 antichrists, except the first of the 2 antichrists, the Pope, is not Pope Leo, but will be Pope Francis, who will, or is predicted to become or be resurrected in April 2029. That's another subject. Okay, so we have, anyway, the 2 antichrists identified once again in God's signs. Now, Paul Simon was known to be an avid baseball fan. That's one reason why this is relevant. Also, his head injury is symbolic of people's heads being injured and their brains being injured from the things. You know what I'm talking about, the things. And the components in the things make their way to people's brains. And that will ultimately lead to demonic possession, and on, as explained in countless other Paul Simon videos. But the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing, is symbolized by the number 22 in God's signs. And the Antichrists, the 2 Antichrists, will enforce the mark of the Antichrist. The reason why the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by the number 22 is because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in the book of Ezekiel, which would have been a Tav mark, and the Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the last and 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist alters a person's chromosomes, and chromosomes come in pairs, and each chromosome has 2 arms, and so 2 and 2, 22. Now, another sign we received on this date was the death of Fuzzy Zoeller, the famous Hall of Famer golfer, professional golfer, Fuzzy Zoeller, who was known for making, and never lived it down for the rest of his life, his racist comment after he had finished the Masters and while Tiger Woods was still playing the Masters on his way to winning his first Masters tournament. The first black player to win the Masters. Again, hints at the first black president, Antichrist. Also, Tiger Woods is the GOAT, greatest of all time, and that hints at the GOAT Antichrist. Now, Fuzzy Zoeller was one of 2 players in the modern era to win the Masters in their first year as a professional. The other player was Tiger Woods. And Tiger Woods is known for his big comeback when he won the Masters 22 years after he first won the Masters in his first year as a professional. And so that's why the death of Fuzzy Zoeller also reveals adding 22 days. Now, there's so much more that's so amazing regarding all of this that is, for one thing, explained in the must-watch, as if all of them are must-watch, as you should know. 2 National Guardsmen shot, 2-nation trip by the Pope video regarding Paul Simon. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. That's the introduction here. Again, like I said, God was pointing to November 27th ahead of time. So the rest of this video will talk about how and why God pointed to November 27th ahead of time. And all of the analysis is 100% correct when the prediction comes to pass 22 days later on December 19th. And so Don't be confused when in this video later on I talk about how Paul Simon is predicted to slip and fall on November 27th. God was saying that. That's what God was saying. It was not, quote unquote, wrong, quote unquote. It was 100% correct. Okay, God was saying that Paul Simon would slip and fall on November 27th. But the way it works, and this is how it works, and I know far better than you or anyone how it works, is that it's not necessarily possible to know ahead of time, ahead of the date that God is pointing to, whether or not it will be the end of the trail of signs for that prediction or another step in the trail. And so November 27th was pointed to, and it was for Paul Simon's trail, and it ended up being a step. Now December 19th might be a step. But at this time, we're going to go with the prediction that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head on December 19th. If it doesn't happen, you can rest assured there will be clear and relevant signs related to it on December 19th. And that said, enjoy the rest of the video. It must be watched. It's extremely important information, all of these videos. All right, welcome. This video is predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on November 27th, 2025, Thanksgiving Day, and it is predicted that the news of this will be first reported the following day on Black Friday, November 28th. As we can see here, this email was composed on November 15th. Okay, and this proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time. That said, it has been known for a number of months that God is communicating through his prophetic signs that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head. All right, and there have been other steps in the trail of signs that has been leading to this, including, for example, October 31st. There are videos on this channel that communicate, or rather, I should say, explain what God was communicating regarding October 31st ahead of time. And the signs on that date confirmed adding 9 plus 9 plus 9 days to reach Thanksgiving. And one of the signs was Trump's interview for the first time since the lawsuit with CBS in his mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, Florida. Paul Simon is associated with this theme of mansions in God's signs, as Paul Simon's best-selling album was named after the king of rock and roll's mansion, Graceland. The lawsuit was for 4 times $4 million with CBS, and that's why on the same day, October 31st, Trump trumpeted, because Trump is God's trumpet for prophetic signs, that he had renovated the bathroom named after the 4 times 4th president, President Lincoln, in the White House mansion. This is because the Antichrist, the 44th president, and by the way, the Graceland mansion is in the 4 times 4th state. The King Antichrist, as in the king of rock and roll, will reside in the White House mansion. He is the 44th president. The White House has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms. God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And the White House mansion is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. In other words, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on this layout, if you will, or big picture of signs that are interconnected, because none of God's prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs. And this enables God, through these steps, including October 31st, to tell these stories, which are extremely important because of the knowledge contained in them that is communicated through the stories that is only being explained on this channel. In other words, when the prediction comes to pass that Paul Simon will fall and injure his head on November 27th, it will prove or rather confirm, or rather, I should say confirm, that all of the analysis for October 31st was 100% correct. And therefore, all of the videos that predicted October 31st must be watched. When the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that every minute of every video on this channel must be watched. I will just add, although it doesn't need to be said really, but the skeptic, the extreme skeptic, will say, well, you predicted October 31st, and then it didn't happen, and now you're predicting November 27th, and so you just got lucky. You're just picking these dates, and eventually you'll get lucky. That's absolutely ludicrous. You need to have your mind checked, in my opinion, because I'm also not only predicting the death of an old man, which in itself is something, because he is only 84. He could live another 6 to 16 years. And I'm not predicting every date. It's only October 31st and November 27th, but also I'm predicting that he'll slip and fall and injure his head. And so the person that is still a skeptic after the prediction comes to pass, because I predicted October 31st, needs to have their head checked. Why do I say this? Because it also proves that the righteous Christian God of the Bible is the true God. That's the purpose of this prediction. The first and foremost, the obvious one, which goes without saying. But I clarify that it is the righteous Christian God of the Bible, because many people in our world today are very confused as to the nature of God. And we need to be clear here that it is predicting, or rather proving, this prediction will prove that the righteous Christian God of the Bible is the true God. Not some God that is made up in one's own imagination, like the New Age God, the quote-unquote spiritual person's God, the energy God, the collective consciousness God, the Indian religion, the Hindu, Buddhist religion that's replaced Christianity in the West God. Not that God. Neither is the Muslim God. It is the righteous Christian God of the Bible. And believe me, I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. And it isn't only to prove that the righteous Christian God of the Bible is the true God, but it is also to prove the controversial things that I'll be saying in these videos. Make no mistake. I know more than you the reason and purpose for this prediction. And it is to prove the controversial things that I'll be saying, because these controversial things are overwhelmingly proved through God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, which will be proven to be true when the prediction comes to pass. And so to not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God. And the point of this video and video channel, you might as well turn off the video now if you do not appreciate this, or refuse to appreciate it because you believe in something contradictory to the controversial things that I'll be saying. But the purpose of prophecy is to prove the matter, which is why 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy. It's how, for example, I came to faith. I was not raised in any way in a Christian culture nor a Christian family, and it is through evidence, which is contained in Bible prophecy, that I came to realize that it is rationally true that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. And anyway, that's the purpose of this prediction. This is a form of prophecy. And I'm not saying that I'm a prophet at all. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I believe God has given me this responsibility, is that I do not claim to be a prophet, because there are no prophets today. And there are many people confused on that subject, which is something of another subject. But what I am saying is that I do have the authority to tell you what God is communicating through his big picture of signs, because of this prediction. And I know the reason and purpose for this prediction. It is to give me a voice to tell you the truth about the controversial things that I'll be stating. And so, in summary, the The point of this prediction is for you to go, oh, cool, neat, that's quite interesting. You were able to know this was going to happen ahead of time. Wow, that's pretty cool, and congratulations. No, this is not the purpose of this prediction. It's not for you to go, oh, neat, and to just dismiss whatever else comes after this. The purpose of this prediction is the information that God has used to reveal this prediction, which is only being explained on this channel. And it includes multiple controversial things that most people will disagree with, but in my opinion, after the prediction comes to pass, it would be prudent to humble yourself and re-examine what you already thought to be true, because it isn't. And that is the purpose of the prediction. So let's begin with what I wrote here. This email is documenting the prediction that singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall down and severely injure his head on November 27th, 2025. And the news of this will be first reported on November 28th, 2025. Simon will die from his head injury. I do not know yet, or if it will be known. I assume that it may be revealed, and maybe it has and I haven't recognized it. But at some point, Paul Simon will die due to his head injury. I forgot to mention the connection to Elvis, because Elvis fell and hit his head in his mansion in California, and professionals now believe that that's ultimately how he died 10 years later in his other mansion in Graceland. In the bathroom, by the way, which is why the Lincoln bathroom sign on October 31st that I just mentioned. Anyway, he didn't die from his drug intake. His drug intake was in response to him coping with the autoimmune diseases that he had been suffering with ever increasingly since his head injury. And the autoimmune diseases gets into another subject regarding Elvis, which is explained many other times in other videos, but Elvis changed history when he took the polio thing, the VACC, and ends with an INE. When he took that thing, it changed history and baby boomers' perceptions of this thing, which changed dramatically the thing industry, and the rest is history. And so that's not even the surface level of the story that God is telling through Elvis and Paul Simon. And it's just one aspect of it, the thing aspect. But that's just not even scratching the surface of the thing aspect of this story. And so that's why you need to watch all of the videos. Okay? And there's a good reason why the head is being pointed to as well. Because those who take the thing will become demonically possessed through their brains. Now, the news of Paul Simon's predicted fall and injury of his head on November 28th, 2025 will be 4,400 plus 4,400 plus 44. Again, God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. This gives us 44, and it hints at the 44th president, Antichrist king, who will live in a mansion. Okay, and so this is the number of days exactly after 9/11. 4,400 plus 4,400 plus 44. And on 9/11, 44 people died on the 4th hijacked plane that crashed at a 40-degree angle and created a 40-acre pit, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh. This is because of the demons that will rise from the bottomless pit, as described in the book of Revelation and the trumpet judgments, which follow the sound of silence that's observed in heaven, which points to Paul Simon, his first hit. The first plane to crash on 9/11 was Flight 11, and it departed Governor's Island in Boston, which is named after John Winthrop, the man who led the 11 ship flotilla. And an airplane is a ship, so that's why Flight 11. Because of Winthrop's 11-ship flotilla of Puritans to the New World. Before departing their ships into the Promised Land, Winthrop delivered a famous sermon that was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, Moses warned the Israelites before they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land of God's promises of blessings or curses that were dependent on their obedience to God's commandments. Okay, so the Pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic as analogous to the Israelites' crossing of the Jordan River into the Promised Land, because the Pilgrims saw the New World as their Promised Land. And like the Israelites, who were escaping religious persecution from the king of Egypt, the Pilgrims were escaping religious persecution from the King of England. And so we have the 11-ship flotilla. By the way, also it was 101 passengers on the Mayflower that anchored on the date. The first date they anchored was the date 11/11, and it took 66 days, a number of days that was not anticipated because of a storm that blew them way off course and to Massachusetts instead of Virginia, where they were destined. Had they gone there, they wouldn't have survived. And Cape Cod is shaped geographically like a giant hook because it was God hooking them into Massachusetts to begin the age of fishing for men, which God used America, his disciple of his nation of disciples, to spread the gospel around the world. And Jesus said he wouldn't come back until the world had heard the gospel. Anyway, they anchored, and 66 days is the 11th triangular number. So they took the 11th triangular number, anchored on the date 11/11, and it was 101, which hints at 11. But it was also 11 ships in the flotilla. And the speech or the sermon that Winthrop gave, who lived on Governor's Island, which is why the Flight 11 departed Governor's Island, that speech was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28, as I've just explained now. And so that gives us 11 and 28. That's quite interesting because of the following. Winthrop's warning to the Puritans on the 11 ships paralleled God's warning in Deuteronomy chapter 28. And this is why the news of Simon's fall will come on the date 11/28. Simon's hit song, American Tune, speaks of the pilgrims, the pilgrim passengers who crossed the Atlantic on the Mayflower, and of the journey of the Apollo 11 ship. And of course, the Mayflower is a ship, and that's why Apollo 11, because the Apollo 11 ship points to the Mayflower ship. And the journey into space, the uncharted to the New World, the moon, is analogous to the Pilgrims crossing into the New World. And why is God doing all of this? To point to Winthrop's speech, which warned those who were about to step into the Promised Land of God's promises of blessings and curses. And what's interesting, too, is that in this description, we have a metaphor of an eagle swooping down. Well, on the tail of Flight 11 was an eagle, and it swooped down into the buildings that looked like a giant 11 in the 11th state in New York City, made of 11 letters. Flight 11 had a crew of 11. Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for America to repent and turn back to God from the disobeying of his commandments, which will lead to curses. And so part of these promised curses includes the swooping of the eagle, but also a description of walking on iron under a bronze sky, which is exactly what happened on 9/11 after the eagle swooped down. Paul Simon opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live in Manhattan after 9/11. It was 4 days after 9/11, and we just talked about this 4,400 plus 4,400 plus 44 days after 9/11. Actually, if we go 4,400 plus 4,400 plus 40 days, we get the date that Paul Simon sang and opened the broadcast of Saturday Night Live with his song, The Boxer. Boxing is about punching and knocking an opponent out so they collapse onto the mat. And on 9/11, the buildings collapsed. In other words, Paul Simon is symbolic of 9/11 and the beginning of the warning to turn back to God, or else just judgment and destruction. Paul Simon's fourth album with Garfunkel has the song America, and the album's name is Bookends. Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the warning of opportunity for America to repent that has slidden away Paul Simon's hit from his fourth solo album. In other words, also, Paul Simon's first album with Garfunkel, Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., hinted at 3 and 4, because Wednesday is the fourth day of the week, and 3 a.m. in ancient Israel was the beginning of the fourth watch of the night. So Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. gives us 3 and 4. This album was made after Wally Amos, the founder of Famous Amos Cookies, lured them into his office, Simon and Garfunkel, with cookies, and then signed them to their first label. And then he went on, Wally Amos, to found Famous Amos Cookies, the biggest cookie company in America, because it's a sign from God. Well, Wally Amos hints at the first chapter of the book of Amos, and the repeating idiom in this chapter, for 3 transgressions and for 4. And this idiom means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable. Which is why I say that Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the opportunity to repent, and now with his death, it will be symbolized that the opportunity or the transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment is unavoidable. And so with Paul Simon's death, we can discontinue the hope that many still have for this so-called or supposed anticipated revival that we all know isn't going to happen. But if you didn't know that, when Paul Simon's death happens, then you will know. And so that's what's going on here. After being signed to a record label by Wally Amos, the founder of Famous Amos Cookies, Simon and Garfunkel produced their first album titled Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the fourth day of the week, and in ancient Israel, the fourth watch of the night began at 3 a.m. The Hebrew idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4 is repeated in the first chapter of the book of Amos, which has 15 verses. This idiom means that the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and judgment is unavoidable. On the date 115, as in Amos chapter 1 with its 15 verses, in 2019, Simon had a dream in which a voice told him to produce his 7 Psalms album. The British vocal ensemble Voices 8, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, maybe it's Latin or something, are guests on the album. 8 is equal to 4 plus 4. But also 8 is relevant because of Paul Simon, because of Revelation chapter 8, verse 1, and the sound of silence in heaven that precedes the 7 trumpet judgments, which is why the 7 Psalms album. Okay, so the British ensemble is Voices 8. It's a guest on the album. 8 is equal to 4 plus 4. The dream about making the 7 Psalms album on the date 115, which hints at Amos 1 with its 15 verses, and the idiom again is for 3 transgressions and for 4 in 2019 with its guests Voices 8, which is hints at 4 plus 4, is 7, as in 7 Psalms, times 44 plus 44 plus 44 days before the predicted news of Paul Simon's fall on November 28th, 2025. The theme of the album is the end of life and crossing over into the afterlife. And so that's why we would expect this profound connection from the dream that Simon had that pointed to, for example, for 3 transgressions and for 4, and the voice I should say that instructed him to make the album, hence the guests on the album Voices 8, We'll just call it Voices 8. Who cares if they forgot to put the I in the word there? Voices 8, okay? And that's amazing because we got the 7 times 44 plus 44 plus 44. Not only that, Paul Simon's a theme in Paul Simon's Signs is the mansion in which the 44th president will dwell, and that mansion has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms, as mentioned earlier. But again, we got the for 3 transgressions and for 4. And we could even add this too. The bridge, as in Paul Simon's big hit, Bridge Over Troubled Water, in God's Signs, is the same symbol as a door, which is the symbol that is the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And Paul Simon is Jewish. So anyway, you can see this is a profound connection here. From the date of the dream, we have this profound connection with the 7, because the dream is about the 7 Psalms album. And it's 7 times 44 plus 44 plus 44. And the album, because the dream was about a voice, the album has a voice. As guests, the voice is 8, 4 plus 4. Paul Simon famously opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live in New York City after 9/11. He also performed at the 9/11 memorial on the 10th anniversary. Simon and Garfunkel's first album was Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., which hints at the Hebrew idiom in the book of Amos for 3 transgressions and for 4. By the way, on 9/11, 3 out of the 4 planes hijacked crashed, or rather, or hit their targets, I should say. That was for 3 transgressions and for 4. I'll repeat that. 9/11 in itself was for 3 transgressions and for 4. It was a warning of this, because again, this idiom means that the judgment is unavoidable. 9/11 was a warning for 3 transgressions and for 4, because it was 3 out of 4 planes that struck their targets. Okay. And we have Paul Simon, as I've now explained, because he's associated with not only 9/11, but also for 3 transgressions and for 4. The predicted news of Simon's fall on November 28th will be the 4 plus 4th super prime number of days after 4 lightning strikes struck 4 iconic locations in New York City and Washington, D.C. On 9/11, 4 planes targeted 4 iconic locations in New York City and Washington, D.C. That's why the 4 lightning strikes. 3 of the planes struck their targets, and this hints at for 3 transgressions and for 4. Okay, what were the lightning strikes? It was the One World Tower, which replaced the Twin Towers, which were struck on 9/11, the Empire State Building, the 2nd tallest tower in Manhattan, and the Washington Monument, and the Capitol Building, which was the 4th target on 9/11. So the mainstream media even commented on this night, which was New Year's Eve, or New Year's Day morning, how uncanny it was that 4 iconic locations had been struck by lightning on the same night. Now, these 4 lightning strikes occurred on the same night as the Ford, which hints at the number 4, Lightning truck, that's the model of the truck, the Ford Lightning truck, as in 4 lightning strikes, the Ford Lightning truck struck people in a terrorist attack in New Orleans, which was on a Wednesday morning at 3 a.m. Yeah, New Year's morning, the attack was at 3 a.m. and it was a Wednesday. That's Simon's and Garfunkel's first album, which God used to point to the idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4. And we had the lightning strikes that pointed to 9/11, which was about the 3 targets that were hit out of 4 planes. Okay. And the 4th one, by the way, killed 44 people. Now, Simon's hit song, Graceland, is about his journey on the highway from New Orleans to Memphis in the 4 times 4th state. Okay, so Paul Simon's best-selling album, Graceland, has a song, Graceland, and it's all about traveling from New Orleans. Simon's hit song, Graceland, is about, as I just said that, okay, so the attack that used a Ford Lightning truck in New Orleans to strike people was in the 6 plus 6 plus 6th state. And in Bible prophecy, 666 is symbolic of the Antichrist, the 44th president. The 4th plane on 9/11 struck the ground in Pennsylvania and killed 44 people. The 44th president will reside as the Antichrist at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue, and he was born on the 6 times 6 times 6th day of the calendar year, and his name is Barak, which means lightning in Hebrew, and Barak is equal to 6 times 6 times 6 in English gematria. Paul Simon famously opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live in New York City after 9/11. He also performed at the 9/11 Memorial on the 10-year anniversary. Simon also performed a reunion concert with Garfunkel in Central Park in Manhattan. On 9/11, planes crashed into towers in Manhattan and people died. Okay, I'll just repeat this now. So Simon, again, like I've explained, is associated with 9/11 because he performed at the first broadcast after 9/11 from Manhattan, Saturday Night Live, and also on the 10-year anniversary at the memorial. Okay, now he also performed in Central Park, the reunion concert, which incidentally, I forgot to mention here, was 9 months and 11 days after John Lennon was shot next to Central Park. But that's another subject. On 9/11, planes crashed into towers in Manhattan and people died. On February 23rd, 2024, a famous owl that had escaped the Central Park Zoo crashed his head into a tower in Manhattan and died and collapsed. February 23rd, 2024 is exactly 90 plus 1 plus 1 weeks before the predicted news of Simon's crash and fall and head injury on November 28th, 2025. Okay? So in other words, the owl, the famous owl, okay, his death is a 9/11 sign because he crashed with his head into the tower, right? It's also in Manhattan, furthermore. And Simon is Manhattan symbolism, 9/11 symbolism, and he's predicted to fall and crash and injure his head, like the owl injured his head. Paul Simon's new album, 7 Psalms, has owls on its cover. It uses the famous painting by Thomas Moran, 2 Owls, which hints at the 2 towers on 9/11. One thing that I did write in this paragraph, the owl died, well, another thing actually, the owl was 13 years old and 13 symbolizes America. Paul Simon has a famous hit, America, and also a hit American tune. There were 13 colonies that founded America. That's why, the 13. It's all over the money, for example, the number 13. When they did an autopsy on the owl, it was deduced that the owl would have died anyway, and the reason why he hit the tower is because he was disoriented, and that's why he hit the tower, was because he had ingested rat poison from the rats that he had been eating. And so the owl was poisoned and he injured his head. And this is symbolic of how Paul Simon's head injury is pointing to the poisoning that people do to themselves when they take the thing, the mark of the Antichrist, the thing that you can't talk about. You know what I'm talking about. the thing that goes inside people and poisons them, which will lead to demonic possession and disorientation, etc. The demonic possession will be induced by frequencies, which is what music is, which is why Paul Simon and Elvis Presley, music frequencies travel through the air, and it will trigger things inside the brains of people that will induce delta brain waves, which will facilitate demonic possession. That's why the beginning of Paul Simon's hit Graceland, the first lyric, is the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. Paul Simon famously dated Shelley Duvall and then broke up with her at the airport before she flew to the UK to film the movie The Shining, which is about demonic possession. And also a large hotel, which is mansion symbolism. Simon is predicted to fall and severely injure his head at the age of 84. The name Obama is equal to 84 in Hebrew gematria, and Simon is Jewish. The news of Simon's head injury is predicted to be 48 days, which hints at 84, after Diane Keaton died. Keaton's maiden name is Hall, and she won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in the movie Annie Hall. In fact, Woody Allen, I'm sure of it, got the name Annie Hall from Diane Keaton, because Annie rhymes with Diane. That's a typo. It's not Diana Keaton, it's Diane Keaton. And her maiden name was Hall, and so that's why Annie Hall. But this is a sign from God because of this theme, like I'm explaining, regarding mansions and halls. Because in the movie The Shining, for example, like I just mentioned, the demonic possession is highlighted in the ballroom hall in the hotel. So, Keaton's maiden name is Hall, and she won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in the movie Annie Hall. Paul Simon met Shelley Duvall on the movie set of Annie Hall. And Simon broke up with Duvall at the airport before she flew to the UK to film the movie The Shining, about a haunted hotel and ballroom hall. By the way, the airport, as in portal, is part of this theme of the door and the bridge that will be unlocked with a key to the bottomless pit from which the demons will cross over through and demonically possess people, as described in one of the trumpet judgments that follow the sound of silence in heaven. And so that's why Simon broke up with her at the airport before she flew to film the movie The Shining, which is about a haunted hotel and ballroom hall. And that's why he met Duvall during the movie set of Annie Hall. It's so clever, but there's something extremely profound that's going on here. The murders in the Overlook Hotel, the name of the hotel in the movie The Shining. And by the way, The Shining was written by Stephen King, and in the demonic possession prophecy, after the demons cross over, is a description of the king Apollyon, which is the same as Apollo. And Paul Simon sings about Apollo 11. And he sang American Tune about Apollo 11, 9 days, as in Revelation 9:11, describing King Apollyon, King Apollo, in other words, Satan. He sang Apollo 11 at the pre-inaugural ball on the date 1/19, January 19th, which hints at 9/11. He sang about Apollo 11, 9 days before Stephen King's book, The Shining, was published. All right. The murders in the Overlook Hotel in The Shining are a prophetic sign that pointed to the hall in the Wannsee House that overlooks the lake near Berlin that the Nazis used to formulate the final solution. Simon sang about the King of Rock's Graceland mansion. The Antichrist is a murderer, and he will reside in the White House mansion that has 132 rooms. And Trump is currently adding a ballroom hall to the White House. Okay? Let's just pause here for a second to elaborate a little bit. The movie, The Shining, has in it embedded by the director Kubrick the number 42. But contrary to what the conspiracy theorists say, Kubrick did not do this intentionally. First of all, in the movie, the kid and the mother, Shelley Duvall, are watching the movie Summer of 42. Now, the reason why Kubrick included this movie, which is a famous movie that was made before The Shining was made, is because of the theme of the movie, not because of the number 42. The theme of the movie is child abuse. The theme of the Summer of 42, that I should say. Sexual child abuse, which is part of this plot of the movie The Shining. Okay? Now also, in one of the scenes, the boy, Danny, wears a shirt with the number 42 on his shoulders. But that was random. The crew had gathered before the filming a whole pile of clothes that Danny could possibly wear, and that shirt was just simply chosen. Now, also, in the movie, there are, as people have pointed out, which of course is an accident, there are 40, not of course, I don't mean to belittle the conspiracy theorists, but what I'm saying is that this is all from God and not from Kubrick. There are 42 cars in the parking lot in the opening scene, which we see from above the Overlook Hotel. We can see 42 cars in the parking lot. Now, the famous iconic room, which is one of the most cited things in movie history, the room 237 in the movie. Well, that wasn't Kubrick's original intention. He intended it to be room 137, but the hotel that he was filming at in the UK objected because they actually had a room 137 and they didn't have a room 237. And so that's why Kubrick changed it to 237. But coincidence has it that 2 times 3 times 7 equals 42. Okay, and of course there's another coincidence, which is from God, which is that the sweater, one of the sweaters Danny wears is of Apollo 11, which was the mission to the moon, and on average the moon is 237,000 miles away from Earth. But that's not because Kubrick filmed the landing of the moon. Contrary to what the conspiracists believe, it's from God. And the prediction will prove this. That's the purpose of this prediction. I know more than you do the reason and purpose for this prediction. The moon landing wasn't staged by Kubrick. Yes, there's a coincidence here, but it's from God. It's a prophetic sign. And why is all of this 42? What's the theme of the movie? It's demonic possession. It's about murder. But also, if you look carefully into what Kubrick was doing, he was communicating subtly the reason why the hotel was haunted, which was that it was built on top of a cemetery of Native Indians, sacred burial ground. And so it's about the slaughter. The theme, the hidden theme is the slaughter, the mass murder, the genocide of the Native Americans, which is pointing to the genocide of the Jews in the Holocaust that began with the final solution in the mansion, in the hall, in the year 42. Okay? That's the true reason for these coincidences in the movie The Shining. What's confusing, which is part of God's thing here, is that Kubrick was known for placing Easter eggs in his movies. But it's the same with Back to the Future. Robert Zemeckis was also known for doing such things, yet God used that aspect of Zemeckis and Kubrick to communicate these prophetic signs. Okay? Yes, it's all from God, in other words, even Zemeckis and Kubrick themselves. So, back to this subject here. What we have is that God is communicating the Wannsee Hotel, the Overlook Hotel, because the Wannsee House overlooked, which is why the Nazis chose it. The mansion used as a conference center hotel was used, it was popular because it overlooked the lake. And the name of the hotel in the movie The Shining is the Overlook Hotel. So, in other words, the Overlook Hotel is pointing to the overlooking mansion house, the Wannsee House, with its hall that the Nazis used, which is why the demonic possession in the hall, the ballroom hall, in the movie The Shining. And The Shining is a word, a euphemism for demonic possession in the movie. That's what The Shining is in the movie. And that's why Paul Simon's hit, the first line of his of the song Graceland is, the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. And why Paul Simon sang American Tune about Apollo 11, 9 days before the published Stephen King's book, The Shining, because it points also to Elvis, the king of rock, who died at 42 years old in his mansion because of King Apollyon in Revelation 9:11, that's describing the demonic possession of those who take the thing and get the components from the thing into their brains, which will be triggered by frequencies, as in music, as in Prince of the Power of the Air, euphemism for Satan in the Bible, and that will facilitate demonic possession, the delta brainwaves. And those who refuse to take the mark, the thing, will be on the receiving end of a politicide genocide, which has been unfolding for many years. We are in the latter stages. You can look this up online, the 10 stages of genocide. We are well past stage number 5. With the blue team, the left, the demon cats, and their persecution of their true enemies, true conservatives, and true Christians. And that's what's happening. That's what's described also in Bible prophecy, that there will be a genocide of Christians and Jews in the last days. Okay? So that's where it's all headed here. And that's what God's communicating through all of this story here. So where was I in this paragraph now? We're talking about the mass murder, which is what the theme of The Shining is, like I have now explained, which is why it is all about the number 42, because it points to the mass murder of the final solution implemented, formalized in the year 42 in the mansion, in the hall. Okay. Now, the thing is that God, how will God approve all of this? Through the prediction. How do I know this prediction ahead of time? Through this 48 days. Why is this relevant? Well, Paul Simon will die at the age of 84, and 84 identifies the Antichrist, as I explained. 48 days before Paul Simon's predicted news of his fall was the death of Diane Keaton. Well, why is she relevant? Well, because she points to Shelley Duvall in the movie Annie Hall, whom Simon met while filming Annie Hall together, and then he broke up with her before she departed at the airport to film the movie The Shining. Okay? Now, so that's why Diane Keaton died when she did, to point to Paul Simon's fall, or at least the news of it, on November 28th. Now, so the 48 days. Now, Diane Keaton, here's the thing. The Antichrist is a murderer, and he will reside in a White House mansion that has 132 rooms, which is 44 plus 44 plus 44. And the Antichrist is the 44th president. And Trump is currently adding a ballroom hall to the White House, which is a play from God on the ballroom hall demonic possession in the movie The Shining. Diane Keaton died exactly 13 plus 2 months after Shelley Duvall died, which hints at the number 132 in the mansion and the ballroom hall. And the additional one room, which by the way gives us 133 symbolically, because maybe there'll be more than one room in the ballroom hall, but that's irrelevant. It's just now 133 that God's pointing to, and that is the 44th semi-prime number. Now, Duvall died in Blanco, Texas, and Blanco is Spanish for white. And this hints at the White House mansion that has 132 rooms, because we have, from the death of her in Blanco, 13 plus 2 months, exactly, to the death of Diane Keaton. I mean, they died on the same day of the month, July 11th and then October 11th. She died in Blanco, Texas, which is coincidentally only a few miles from the mansion where Simon recently moved to due to his wife being from Texas, not because Shelley Duvall lives there. Now, 13 plus 2 months is also 15 months. And Simon's most recent album, 7 Psalms, that he made at his house in Texas, is his 15th solo album. California is the 31st state, and 31 is the 11th prime number. Duvall died the 31st prime number of days after prosecutors in the 11th state, New York, abruptly dropped the criminal case against 3 men accused of conspiring to possess and sell stolen handwritten lyrics to the Eagles' hit song, Hotel California. Okay, now, this is a sign that we expected in advance of this March 6th, 2024 date. And again, we knew it was going to be a Paul Simon sign. Not only are the Eagles baby boomer musicians in the 70s like Paul Simon, but the Hotel California hints at the hotel overlook and this mansion theme. Furthermore, the Hotel California is a euphemism for prison, spiritual prison. It speaks of it, there's a lyric in it talking about how you can check in, but you can't check out. It's a prison. And in the trumpet judgment, the demons are released from the bottomless pit, which is a prison. Okay, now, God uses this number frequently in his signs, H188. Because, 188, because H180 in the Hebrew Concordance is the word for woe, exclamation mark. The case regarding Hotel California was dropped on March 6, 2024, the exact 188th anniversary of the collapse of the walls of security in the Battle of the Alamo. And we knew that ahead of time that God was pointing to March 6, 2024 because of this 188th anniversary. And that's because we knew Paul Simon had recently moved to Wimberley, Texas, which is near the Alamo. But it's also this theme in God's signs of walls of security collapsing, which is also what happened on 9/11, when the towers collapsed and engendered a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, and on, okay? Now, the Alamo is located a few miles from where Duvall died and where Simon currently lives. This story about the original handwritten lyrics to Hotel California relates to Paul Simon, who is known to be the GOAT, greatest of all time, of American pop music composition. And this sign is about the composition on the handwritten lyrics papers that were allegedly stolen. And both Don Henley and Simon are baby boomer musicians. Simon's 15th solo album is 7 Psalms, and the Hotel California prophetic sign on the 188th anniversary of the Alamo was exactly 15 weeks after a vehicle drove at a high speed before jumping into the air at the Rainbow Bridge Customs Crossing in the 11th state, I should add. And again, this was a lawsuit brought in the 11th state. Now, 15 weeks is also 2,520 hours, which is the prophetic number of days in Daniel chapter 9 that symbolizes the end times period. And we are already inside the last 20 days, and because it is only symbolic. Those that are looking for some sort of thing to happen to be obvious to all those who know, have the insider wisdom that the end times have begun, well, sorry, it's only symbolic. We are already inside it. That's one of the controversial things that I'm talking about, which is a fact when the prediction comes to pass. Don't want to get into that anymore. Now, the thing is that, so we have the 15 weeks connecting to the Hotel California sign from the jumping of the car into the air at the Rainbow Bridge, okay? And Simon again produced his album Near the Alamo, and it's his 15th solo album, okay? Now, the occupants in the car that jumped into the air and then crashed into a fiery explosion at the Rainbow Bridge, which, by the way, cost $4 million to make, and bridge is the same symbol as a door. Door is the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and they were on their way to a KISS concert, which is 4 letters, and KISS concerts are known for their musicians dressing up as demons, and demons will cross through the door, the bridge, from the bottomless pit to demonically possess people. Okay, now, so anyway, the KISS founder, Gene Simmons, took his performer name from Jumpin' Gene Simmons, whose only hit song was Haunted House. Jumpin' Gene Simmons opened concerts for Elvis Presley while they were both with Sun Records in Memphis, which is where Elvis's mansion is, and some people claim that his mansion is haunted. Okay, Elvis Presley famously covered Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water. Again, the demons will cross over the bridge. And Simon sang about Presley's mansion in the 4x4th state. The car that crashed at the bridge cost $4 million to build, was on its way to a KISS concert, and it jumped, as in Jumpin' Gene Simmons, into the air 188 days after the release of Simon's 15th album, Seven Psalms. And again, that's relevant because the jump at the bridge connects to the 188th anniversary of the Alamo. And the Alamo was sieged for 13 days. Again, the owl died at the age of 13. And Simon is associated with 13, one reason being he was born on the 13th day of the month, but also his song America, which is symbolized by the number 13, 13 colonies. In other words, the collapse of the walls of security of Alamo was symbolic of the collapse of the walls of security of America, which was warned of on 9/11, which is also what Paul Simon symbolizes. And so, now the jumping of the car at the $4 million bridge on its way to a KISS concert, which is 4 letters, was also the exact 2 times 30th anniversary of President Lincoln being shot in the head in a car. That car had its peak of popularity in the 1960s, and the assassination of Lincoln was the first of 4 famous political assassinations, or infamous, in the 1960s. His brother, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X. Martin Luther King, I should say, in the 4 times 4th state near the mansion of Elvis's, the King of Rocks, okay? And he was assassinated on the date 4/4 in the 4 times 4th state, Martin Luther King Jr., okay? Now, but the reason why the connection for Lincoln, and the car he was assassinated in was a Lincoln, a Ford Lincoln Continental, which was known for its 4 suicide doors. Exactly 2 times 30 years later was the suicidal crash of the car that jumped and crashed into the customs at the bridge. It was said to be suicidal, and it connects with the suicide doors, the 4 of them in the Lincoln who was shot in the head. Well, the 4 times 4th president was also shot in the head in Ford Theater. And his name is Lincoln, which is why the Ford Lincoln car in which Kennedy was shot in the head. This all points to Elvis, who fell and hit his head in his mansion and then died in his bathroom in his mansion in the 4 times 4th state, and Paul Simon, who is predicted to fall and hit his head. That's why the connection from Jumpin' Gene Simmons. But it also connects, as I said, to Elvis, which connects to Paul Simon. Furthermore, Simmons hints at Simon. Jumpin' Gene Simmons. And Gene Simmons, of the founder of KISS, hints at Simon. The reason for Gene is because it is the genes that people get altered through taking the thing, which makes them marked, which is why it is a mark of the Antichrist. And it'll put the things inside their brains, which will lead to demonic possession, which is why Jumpin' Gene Simmons' only hit was Haunted House. Do you see how it all is so amazing and connects? Now, the thing is, we had now, as I've explained, the connection from the Jumping Gene Simmons sign, the car that jumped into the air suicidally, into the $4 million bridge at the rainbow, and God's sign regarding judgment in the Bible is the rainbow. And that was 188 days after the release of Paul Simon's album, the 15th album, Seven Psalms. And again, the jumping car was exactly 15 weeks before the 188th anniversary. So you see, 15th album, 188 days, 15 weeks, 188th anniversary of the Alamo, which is near where the 15th album was produced. Okay? Now, so the British Ensemble Voices 8 is the guest on the album, and again, 8 is 4 plus 4, and the album was released 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days after Simon had his prophetic dream in which a voice, as in Voices 8, instructed him to make the album. And here's the thing. Elvis changed history. The King of Rock changed history when he took the polio thing in front of the press before he went on to the Ed Sullivan stage at the Ed Sullivan show, which is incidentally why the, what's his name, Colbert, has his show in the Ed Sullivan show, and he was known for promoting the thing during the days of the rollout of the thing, and for mocking those who didn't take it. It's because he is evil, and those that laughed with him are also evil, and they are on their way to hell. And the reason for saying that is to warn them so that they don't and change their ways. And repent. And get yourself out of the bubble of information that is the blue team. And wean yourself off of the propaganda and the lies which you love. And that's the truth. Spiritually, you know it's lies. You know the left is constantly propaganda. You know the things that they accuse the other side of are the things that they are in fact doing. If you don't know that, you have a bigger problem. But spiritually, you love the lies. And why is that? Because the truth is, you are spiritually in rebellion against God. That's the truth. And you will go to hell. So, time to repent. Immediately, you are in big trouble. And I'm not talking about Colbert. I'm talking about those who like Colbert or love to get the lies from the left media. Later in his career, okay, we're talking about Elvis again, after he took the thing and again changed history because he made it cool for baby boomers, which is the generation that shaped all of history, right? Because of the bulge of the demographic. They revolutionized the thing industry because they, prior to Elvis taking the thing, were skeptical and reluctant of these things, which is a lie. I mean, the lie is that, for one thing, that it eradicated polio, which it didn't. Okay, that's another subject, though. And you need to know this information, and you don't know it because, well, you get your media from the small insulated bubble of information, which is the mainstream left media. Okay? You need to stop that right away. You need to stop consuming that media right away and start learning things. It's all propaganda. There's multiple reasons for it. One of them is corruption, because it's all bought and paid for by the thing industry. I mean, for example, the second biggest industry in terms of dollars for lobbying in Washington is the oil industry. The first one is double the amount of dollars from the pharma ends with the pharmaceutical industry. That industry spends double the amount of the second place industry in lobbying. Do you not think that that would cause over time the regulatory agencies to become captive? Which is, of course, what God's voice for truth, RFK Jr., has been talking about, getting us back, connecting us back to the JFK, who was shot in the head. It's all full circle, because RFK, the reason why he has an issue with his voice physically is because he is symbolic of God's voice for truth regarding this matter. And if you've been consuming the propaganda trying to make RFK Jr. look bad, I feel sorry for you, because you have no idea what's going on, and you are completely a sheep, and you're completely a fool. And it's because over time, over decades, step by step, incrementally, you have chosen the wrong path by continually building up your worldview with one lie after another. It starts out small. For example, there is no God. And then it just builds on that to the point where it's probably pretty difficult for you to now change your worldview and see the truth through the lies. Because your whole worldview and your whole brain, your whole mind has been constructed on lies. To tear down one lie means to destruct the entire thing. And you are going to have such a difficult time doing this. But if you don't, you are going to go to hell. Wake up. Start to unravel the lies. The mountain of lies that supports the mountain of lies on top of lies. It's going to be very difficult for you to do. But you got to start somewhere at some time. And you got to do it. You got to have the courage to do it. And it's going to take courage. It's difficult to change one's worldview because it is extremely uncomfortable. But you're going to have to unravel all of the lies, and it's going to be painful for you. But you get what you asked for. A long time ago, you began adding lie after lie to your worldview. And you're going to have to suffer the consequences now. But better do it now than after you die. Okay, back to Elvis. So he took the thing, it changed history, the baby boomers changed history, and later in his career, Elvis was at the Space Needle in Seattle, the 42nd state, getting us back to the Wannsee and the genocide in the year 42, the final solution, which is all a metaphor, it's all symbolic, it's all a type for what's coming, it's all a warning for what's coming. Okay, so in King County, no less, actually Seattle is King County. The king of rock went to the Space Needle in King County in the 42nd state, and he died in his mansion at the age of 42, okay? But he went to the Space Needle after he took the needle. And he went there to film the movie It Happened at the World's Fair. Okay, and Elvis died in his mansion in the 4x4th state due to the head injury he suffered when he fell in his mansion in Los Angeles, which hints at fallen angels, in California, as in Hotel California. The prophetic sign about the song Hotel California, by the way, that sign coincided with another sign, which was the first announcement of a new album from the Doobie Brothers, the first in 44 years to feature Michael McDonald. And one of the albums, I forget, it's prophetic, but it has an image on the cover art of 4 horses, as in the 4 apocalypse horses in the book of Revelation, under a broken bridge that was broken because of the earthquake, the most consequential in American history. Okay, it was an overpass. It was a bridge. It's all Simon symbolism there too. And again, Elvis died from a head injury in the 4x4th state because he fell 10 years earlier in his mansion in Los Angeles, Hotel California, okay? The prophetic sign about the song Hotel California on March 6, 2024 is also 90 weeks and 1 + 1 days before the predicted news on November 28th of Simon crashing and striking his head. This hints at the demonic possession of people through their brains after their genes, as in Gene Simmons, have been marked because of taking the thing that is described in Revelation 9:11 and King Apollyon. And Simon performed on Saturday Night Live 4 days after 9/11, when the 4th plane crashed with 44 deaths in a 40-degree angle in a 40-acre pit, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh, because the demons will emerge from the bottomless pit after the key opens the door. And Simon was born in 41. The word key is equal to 41 in simple English gematria, equals 1, C equals B equals 2, C equals 3. And and the demonic possession will be a result of frequencies. And Paul Simon and Elvis Presley and the Eagles, Hotel California, and the Doobie Brothers. It's all music, which is frequencies. One thing that I forgot to mention, just interesting, is that the Hotel California sign that I mentioned that occurred on March 6, 2024, that was 13 days after the 13-year-old owl slammed his head into a tower and then died. That's also relevant because eagles are a type of bird, a bird of prey, just like an owl is. Also, come to think of it, an owl hints at Barack Obama, who is known to be a night owl for being up late in the White House, in stark contrast with his predecessor, who was known for being an early bird. And God designed that contrast to highlight how Barack Obama is the night owl. But that's also prophetic because, well, now I'm getting off on a tangent, but the name Obama, the proper noun, capital B, Bama in the Bible, which means high place, which was a euphemism for the false religious worship that the Jews would conduct on the tops of mountains, is H1117 in the Strong's Hebrew Concordance, 1117. Well, the first mention of the word owl in the Bible is Leviticus 11:17, and also Zechariah 11:17 describes the Antichrist. Simon is predicted to fall on Thanksgiving Day. The tradition of celebrating Thanksgiving on the fourth Thursday of November was first formalized by the 4x4th president in the White House. Simon's predicted fall on this Thanksgiving will be 44 weeks and 4 days after Trump returned to the White House on January 20th, 2025. During the inauguration ceremony, the winner of the 4th American Idol, Carrie Underwood, was compelled to sing a cappella after a sound of silence, as in Paul Simon, when the music stopped playing. Due to the cold weather, Trump's inauguration was the first in 44 years since the inauguration of the 40th president to be held indoors. Simon opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after 9/11, 4 days after 9/11, when the 4th plane crashed and killed 44 people in Pennsylvania, and Trump returned to the White House mansion located at 4x400 Pennsylvania Avenue after the sound of silence during the inauguration, which was 9 months and 11 days after Simon sang in the White House at a state dinner in the mansion, the White House mansion, and sang about the King of Rock's Graceland mansion in the 4x4th state. The sport of boxing is symbolic of war. Paul Simon performed The Boxer to open the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live in Manhattan after 9/11. Simon currently lives in Wimberley, Texas, near the site of the Battle of the Alamo, which ended after a long siege when the Mexican army finally breached the wall of security of the Alamo. H188 equals whoa, exclamation mark. Okay, this is a number that God uses frequently in his signs. H188 in the Hebrew Concordance is the word for woe, exclamation mark, which is used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. The only other time that a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital on 9/11 was exactly 188 years earlier, when the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate on the date 9/11 in 1813, and then proceeded to burn down the Capitol building and the White House, but not before Dolly Madison, the First Lady, famously rescued the portrait of George Washington. Okay, so what we have here is that Paul Simon sang the Boxer. Boxing is symbolic of war. He sang the Boxer to open the broadcast after 9/11, the first one. And he's predicted to die, or sorry, fall and injure his head, and then die later. I just don't know the date yet. In Wimberley, Texas, which is right near the Battle of the Alamo, which is about war. Okay, and the siege of that Battle of the Alamo ended when the Mexican army finally breached the wall of security, which is why this is symbolic, because it aligns or parallels with the walls of security collapsing in God's judgment on the ancient city of Jericho when the Israelites took the promised land. And also, this is why the towers collapsed and engendered a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, where, for example, George Washington was inaugurated, the first president. In other words, it was the cracking of the foundation of America, which is God, because George Washington, and after his inauguration, dedicated the nation to God in the chapel, which was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived the falling debris, and on and on. Okay, so anyway, this 188th anniversary on March 6th, 2024, of the wall of security being breached of the Alamo, okay, so that's March 6th, 2024, the 188th anniversary of the tragic end of the Battle of the Alamo when the Mexican army breached the walls of security. Okay, now March 6th, 2024 was the day, and this date was known in advance that God was pointing it to it related to Paul Simon, okay? And so that's when we received the related signs that were clear, and this was the day that the Hotel California prophetic sign that was previously mentioned. Okay, so I talked about this earlier. If you're not watching these, if you're watching this video as an isolated video and not part of the whole video, and you're not watching these in chronological order, well, I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, I've talked about the Hotel California sign already, but it's symbolic of Paul Simon because it's a hotel and whatever. So anyway, so March 6, 2024 was 119% of a calendar year, which hints at 9/11, before a vintage Mexican warship crashed into the Brooklyn Bridge between Manhattan and Brooklyn, Queens. Now this is amazing because, again, this was a Paul Simon sign, all right? As I explained before, the Hotel California sign, well, let me just, I guess, say it was the day that the court in New York, speaking of 9/11, threw out the case in which the leader of the band, the Eagles, was suing a few other journalists that were in possession of his original handwritten letters and accused them of stealing them and trying to sell them and whatnot. But, and so they're both baby boomer singers. The siege in the Alamo was 13 days. It was 13 days after the 13-year-old owl died after it crashed its head into the tower in Central Park. Paul Simon sang in the reunion concert with Garfunkel 9 months and 11 days in Central Park after John Lennon was shot next to Central Park, and on and on. Okay, so anyway, so just take my word for it. It was the prophetic sign. It's relevant, but it's a 9/11 sign too because as I just explained there, it connected with the owl. That was a 9/11 sign, and again, on Paul Simon's new album is a depiction of owls. Okay, and well, anyway, so Simon grew up in Queens. We have this vintage, old Mexican warship, like sailing ship, that crashed into the Brooklyn Bridge, and that rhymes with the old Mexican army at the Battle of the Alamo. In fact, you know what? I should really look up as to the year that this Mexican warship would have been in use in battle. Let me just check. Now, I just learned some interesting things. Yes, I was correct. Of course, it makes sense. The Mexican ship is a replica of the ship in use in 1825, which would have only been 12 years after the Mexican army at the Battle of the Alamo. No, I'm sorry. The Battle of the Alamo was in 1836, so it was only 9 years before the Battle of the Alamo. So it predates the Battle of the Alamo. We have some other interesting things here about the ship. It was scheduled to visit 22 ports in 15 nations, and it slammed into the Brooklyn Bridge. B is the second letter of the alphabet. So 2 and 2, Brooklyn Bridge. And Paul Simon is Jewish, and he's from Queens, and there are a lot of Jews in Brooklyn. But also, BB hints at the leader of Israel currently. Anyway, that's just interesting side notes. But anyway, the point is that the 22 ports in 15 nations hints at Paul Simon because we're talking about the Owl album, the Seven Psalms, which is his 15th solo album. And the reason why Paul Simon will fall and injure his head is because it points to the mark of the Antichrist, which is symbolized by the number 22. Because people will become demonically possessed through their brains because of the things that are inside the thing that are put inside of them, and that will trigger delta brainwaves and demonic possession. And the demonic possession will be a result of demons coming through the porthole that's described in the book of Revelation, which is symbolized by Revelation 9, verse 11, 9:11. And King Apollyon, and that's why the king fell and hit his head in this mansion. But it's the hitting of the head is symbolic of the brain injury that Paul Simon will receive, which will in turn be symbolic of the demonic possession through people's brains. And so that's why 22 ports, because it's 22 portholes. And the number 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist. Because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist described in the book of Ezekiel would have been a Tav mark. The Tav is the 22nd and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, which is the 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. And also the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's chromosomes, and chromosomes come in pairs, and each chromosome has 2 arms, and so 2 and 2. Okay, so that's another interesting thing about the ship. It's also Paul Simon related. All right, so getting back to what I was saying, Paul Simon performed the first broadcast, The Boxer, after 9/11. Boxing is symbolic of war, and he's predicted to, crash and fall in Wimberley near the Battle of the Alamo, and there's more signs to confirm that relevance, that connection. This is just a superficial summary of the big picture. This isn't really, I can't explain everything in every video, right? So, and it's so infinite. And so anyway, we've also got the Battle of the Alamo sign on the 188th anniversary with the Hotel California. And there was another sign on that day too, the announcement that the Doobie Brothers would get together for their first album in 44 years, since that would include the focus on Michael McDonald. And the Doobie Brothers have an album that, I forget the name of it, that's under a bridge, but was broken in the most consequential earthquake ever in California, as in Hotel California. And this is the overpass that was that collapsed due to the earthquake. But underneath that, in the cover art for this album, is the Doobie Brothers on a stagecoach with 4 horses, which hints at the 4 horses of the apocalypse in the book of Revelation. And again, Paul Simon performed 4 days after 9/11. Yes, here it is. You can see it. This isn't the best image. Let me see if you can see it here. Okay, yes, this is it's the captain and me. This was after the 1971 earthquake. They've got the 4 horses, the stagecoach. It's just astounding. But we've got this broken bridge, and of course this hints at Paul Simon too, because of his song "Bridge Over Troubled Water," which is in turn symbolic of the bridge that the demons will cross through the portal over into the earthly realm, and then demonically possess people through their heads, which is why Paul Simon will have a head injury. Okay, so back to what I was saying here. Simon grew up in Queens, and he sang about the area of Queens in his hit song, "Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard." Okay, so not only is Paul Simon from Queens, it's part of his music and his repertoire of hits that he would perform at concerts, etc. One of Simon's biggest hits is "Bridge Over Troubled Water," and he has another hit named 59th Street Bridge. And again, this Mexican warship hit the Brooklyn Bridge. But again, the Mexican warship is relevant because of the Mexican army at the Battle of the Alamo. It's just astounding. God is the master creator of creative artist here. The Twin Towers were 110 stories high before they collapsed and struck after being struck by planes on 9/11. The 110th mayor of New York City spoke to the press at 9 p.m. after 1+1 people died when the Mexican warship struck the Brooklyn Bridge, which makes it a 9/11 sign, which in turn makes it a Revelation 9/11 sign, which is part of the Paul Simon signs, because of the bridge that the demons will cross in the trumpet judgment, symbolized by Revelation 9/11. The trumpet judgments follow the sound of silence in heaven, and that's why Paul Simon's first hit was Sound of Silence. So, and it was the 110th mayor, it was 110 stories, of course, that collapsed on 9/11, but 110 also hints at 11, and the 110th mayor spoke at 9 p.m. after 1+1 people died, which also hints at 9/11. Okay, and music, by the way, is frequencies, which is what will trigger the delta brainwaves in people's brains, which will facilitate demonic possession, which is why the first line of Paul Simon's Graceland song is, "The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar," because shining is symbolic of demonic possession, as the movie The Shining is about demonic possession. And Paul Simon famously dated Shelley Duvall before and broke up with her at the airport before she flew to the UK to film the movie. In other words, the Mexican army in 1836 connected with the vintage Mexican warship through Paul Simon. In the Bible, 276 souls survived after the ship Paul, which hints at Paul Simon, was traveling on, crashed into a reef. The Mexican warship crashed its mastheads into the bridge on May 17th, 2025. 27 weeks and 6 days, which hints at 276, before the predicted news on November 28th that Paul Simon has crashed to the ground and severely injured his head. If you didn't catch that, mastheads also hints at Paul Simon's head injury when he crashes to the ground. And the mastheads crashed into the bridge, Paul Simon Bridge over Troubled Water, 59th Street Bridge, which, by the way, is a bridge that connects the Manhattan Island to over the East River, just like the Brooklyn Bridge. Okay, 27 weeks and 6 days. It's amazing because that number symbolizes ships. But also, one of the trumpet judgments is the destruction of ships in Revelation chapter 8. And the ships in that chapter symbolize America, and I won't get into that. I've explained it too many other times in other videos. But there are people that say that America isn't in Bible prophecy, but that is incorrect because the ships symbolize America. Well, since we're talking about ships, I should probably just explain it briefly here again. Isaiah chapter 23 talks about the judgment on ancient Tyre, and Tarshish, and Tyre, and the daughter of Tarshish. Well, we know from evidence from history that Tarshish referred to Great Britain. And Great Britain's power and how it became the dominant empire of the 19th century on which the sun never set, which God used as the cross-pollinator of cultures around the world and spread the gospel through, was a result of its naval power and its ships and its merchant navy as well. And Great Britain birthed America, and likewise its power was a result of its ships. And also, God separated Great Britain from the rest of Europe with an ocean, and that's why it relates to ancient Tyre, because ancient Tyre's prosperity and power were a result of its natural protection of being an island off the coast in the Mediterranean, which wasn't conquered until Alexander the Great built a bridge, a causeway bridge from the mainland to the island. And so that's why in God's signs, Tyre is symbolic of America. Well, anyway, that's why one of the Paul Simon signs was the Tyre-Kill mansion fire, which was expected in advance of the date that it occurred on, which was January 3rd, 2025. Anyway, So a lot of the prophecy in the book of Revelation is actually a parallel with the Old Testament prophecy, including in the book of Isaiah, in this case, the ships of Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish and her ships. This is why the ships that are destroyed, because it's not just random. Why would God put the destruction of ships into this passage if it were just for amusement or interesting imagery? It's not just for interesting imagery. It's because God is pointing to America symbolically through the ships. So in other words, the destruction of the ships is symbolic of the destruction of America, which will begin after the death of Paul Simon, because Paul Simon will be the bookend to the warning of judgment after 9/11, which is why Paul Simon performed right after 9/11 and will die at the end of this period of warning that was 9/11. And that's why his fourth album book ends with the song America, because Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the warning of the opportunity to repent, which has slidden away for America, which is why Paul Simon's song Slip, Slide, and Away is from his fourth solo album. Because of the 4 days after 9/11, after he performed The Boxer, which is about, and boxing is about trying to knock the opponent down and have him collapse on the mat, which is why the towers collapsed on 9/11, and then Paul Simon sang The Boxer. Okay, so, all right, so anyway, see what I'm saying? You know, it's impossible to explain his big picture of science without going off onto these tangents to try to explain it even more of what I'm talking about. Because it can't just download everything. It's three-dimensional. Just like the Bible isn't a linear document. It's three-dimensional. Even just explaining the principle of how God's science works requires going off onto a tangent, okay? So the big picture of science is a three-dimensional big picture, a web, and likewise, so is the Bible. And one can take an infinite number of pathways through the Bible, and it's not meant to be understood linearly, and everything interconnects with everything else, just like God's big picture of science. Okay, and speaking of which, the 276 ships, which is why, and the date 1128 hints, as I explained earlier, the 11-ship flotilla and Winthrop's sermon derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28, which is another reason why God uses ships to symbolize America, because it's all about the founding of America with ships. The Mayflower and the 11-ship flotilla. And the Mayflower had 101 passengers and anchored for the first time on the date 1111 after the 11th triangular number of days crossing the Atlantic. And so anyway, so the date 1128 hints at this. Well, I was jumping ahead actually, because it really is all about the ships symbolizing America. It's not so God knew that the Mayflower and the 11-ship flotilla would symbolize America even before Isaiah wrote about the ships and the ships of Tarshish, which is Great Britain, which is essentially America, at least culturally, inherited culture. And so the date 1128 hints at the sermon derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28 that Winthrop delivered to the Puritans in the 11-ship flotilla, which is why Paul Simon's news of his fall was predicted to occur on this date. On 9/11, the Flight 11 airship with a crew, and that's another thing. The airships on 9/11 point to the ships that founded America, the spiritual founding of America, which was the only other time a nation was founded in the history of the world on God and the Bible, the other being Israel. On 9/11, the Flight 11 airship with a crew of 11 struck the towers that looked like a giant 11 in the 11th state after departing Governor's Island in Boston, which was named after the first governor of Boston Colony, John Winthrop, who resided there and prayed to God there. In the book of Joshua, the Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. Paul Simon lives with his wife in Wimberley, Texas, near the site of the Battle of the Alamo, when the wall of security was breached by the Mexican army. Paul Simon performed at the 9/11 memorial on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. The deadly Texas flooding that began on Independence Day, July 4th, 2025, was 10 years after the deadly flooding in Wimberley, Texas. The deadly flooding on July 4th was a few miles away from the deadly Wimberley, Texas flooding in 2015. It was said that the campers that died along the river on July 4th were hit in the middle of the night by a, quote, wall of water, unquote. The deadly wall of water on July 4th is exactly 7 plus 7 plus 7 weeks before it is predicted that Paul Simon will fall and injure his head in Wimberley, Texas. This 7 plus 7 plus 7 weeks hints at 3 sets of 7, and the symbolic 3 sets of 7 that the Israelites enacted before the walls of security collapsed in the ancient city of Jericho. Okay, the Israelites, when they took the Promised Land, marched around the walls of security of Jericho once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. Speaking of trumpet, who was inaugurated in the year ending in 7, at the age of 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old, 73 days, which is 3 sets of 7, after he was elected by 77 electoral votes, on the same day that Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, as in Joshua in the book of who led the Israelites, was in office for 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days, and that day was exactly 73 weeks, as in 3 sets of 7, after Trump descended the golden escalator in the Trump Tower, the symbolic beginning of Trump, which was exactly 188 months after the 7.0 earthquake in Joshua Tree, California. And archaeology proves that the walls of security of Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake. I'll add one more thing. The storm that engendered the wall of water occurred in the night before, July 3rd, and that day was exactly 2,828 days after Trump said cryptically to the media in front of his generals at a dinner in the White House that it was the calm before the storm. Why is 28 days relevant? Because the date 7-4 hints at 7 times 4 equals 28. The Texas flooding was in Texas, the 28th state. Paul Simon is predicted to fall and hit his head in the 28th state. He has a song named America. America is symbolized by the date 7-4. As a result of the plane crashes in New York City on 9/11, 7 times 7 times 7 FDNY firefighters died. The second plane had 7 plus 7 times 7 passengers, which, by the way, is this 3 sets of 7 that I mentioned in the last paragraph. Because more accurately, more precisely, the symbolic 3 sets of 7 that the Israelites enacted was a 7 plus a 7 times 7. Because they marched around once per day for 7 days, the walls of Jericho, before they collapsed in God's judgment. And then on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. Okay. It was Joshua who led the Israelites in their symbolic 3 sets of 7 around the walls of security of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment. The Bible records that Joshua died at the age of 110. Simon opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after the 110-story towers collapsed. Simon's 7th solo album is named after the king of rock's mansion. After lowering his asking price to $11.9 million, which since at 9/11, Simon sold his mansion near New York City exactly 37 months before the sale of the mansion in Los Angeles that was made for the TV show producer who produced the longest running TV drama in history, Seventh Heaven. Okay, I'll just recap that. God uses records, first of all, for signs. Paul Simon's record-selling best solo album was his 7th album. It was named after a mansion. He sold his New York City mansion exactly 37 months, which is 3 sets of 7, before the famous sale of the mansion owned by the I should say the famous storied mansion, that's the term the media used as well, that was built for the record-setting, most prolific TV show producer who also produced the longest-running TV drama in history, Seventh Heaven. Now, the mansion sold for $110 million. It was a storied mansion. The news headlines were something to the effect of sale of storied mansion. Okay? So the storied mansion sold for $110 million, and that's because of the 110 stories that collapsed on 9/11. Now, in which the 7 times 7 times 7 firefighters died, and there was 7 plus 7 times 7 passengers. All right. Now, on Simon's 7th album, that is named after a mansion, Graceland, is a hit song, Boy in the Bubble, that was inspired by the TV movie produced by Spelling, Aaron Spelling, the owner of the mansion, the record-setting TV producer. His TV movie was The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. So that's another confirmation, connection, tie, parallel between Paul Simon and this TV producer. Because not only is it Seventh Heaven, 7th album, okay, and also Paul Simon's new album is 7 Psalms, which might as well be titled Seventh Heaven in a way. So, but also on the album, the 7th album, is the song Boy in the Bubble, which was inspired by the TV movie produced by Spelling, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, which incidentally starred John Travolta, which is another person God has used in his prophetic science, which also confirms the fact that this is a relevant connection here. Now, the planes that struck the 110-story towers on 9/11 were destined for Los Angeles, where Aaron Spelling's mansion sold for $110 million on the date August 1st, 2025, which, by the way, was a date that was recognized ahead of time. That would be important for Paul Simon, which is why this sign of the mansion sale was recognized, because God was pointing to this date ahead of time, and we know this theme of mansions regarding Paul Simon. The reason why fundamentally the date 8:1 was recognized because it hints at Revelation 8:1, which describes a period of a sound of silence being observed in heaven, and Paul Simon's first hit is Sound of Silence. Now, the mansion sold exactly 119 days, which hints at 9/11, before the predicted news of Simon's collapse and strike of his head. The planes that were destined for Los Angeles struck the 110-story towers 17 minutes apart. The $110 million mansion sold exactly 17 weeks before the predicted news of Simon's collapse and strike of his head. Now, by the way, the 17 minutes between the two planes that struck the two towers is because the two space shuttle disasters were almost exactly 17 years apart. Now, did they strike anything? No, I think they just exploded. But anyway, yeah, they are commemorated on the same day because they were almost exactly 17 years apart. And the reason for that, in turn, is Apollo 17, the last time that an American was on the moon, which in itself is symbolism for America's departure from Christ, because the moon symbolizes Christ. It is a giant rock, and in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus. Also, the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon, which is also why watching for the timing of the moon in the Bible is important, as it is symbolic of watching for the timing of the Lord's return, which includes moon signs. There is a moon. No, maybe it's a sunset. Never mind. Never mind. Okay, so 4 days after the planes struck the towers, and the fourth plane crashed and killed 44 people on 9/11, Simon performed on the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after 9/11. The fourth song from Simon's seventh album that was named after the King's Mansion, the album in the 4x4 state, is Boy in the Bubble, and it was inspired by the TV movie produced by the producer of Seventh Heaven. The cover art for Simon's Seven Psalms album uses Thomas Moran's Two Owls. On the same day of the sale of the mansion that was made for the producer of Seventh Heaven, 4 people were killed in a mass shooting in a bar named the Owl Bar in the 41st state. Simon was born in the year 41. And there's a reason, because the word key is equal to 41 in Simple English Gematria, and it is a key that opens the door in the prophecy in the book of Revelation, which allows the demons to cross over into the earthly realm. And they crossed, and the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet is a symbol for a door, which is another reason for these 4s here, including the fourth song from the album and Simon's performance 4 days after 9/11 when 44 people died in the 4th plane that crashed. And it's also, again, because of Simon's 4th Garfunkel album, Bookends, which contains the song of America, and Paul Simon's 4th solo album, Slip-Sliding Away, because America's opportunity to repent after 9/11 has slip-slidden away, and Paul Simon's death will symbolize the bookend completion of that opportunity. And now the idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4 repeated in the Bible, which means that the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and now judgment is unavoidable. And that's why Paul Simon's first album with Garfunkel was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., because Wednesday is the 4th day of the week, and 3 a.m. is the beginning of the 4th watch in ancient Israel, for 3 transgressions and for 4, a Hebrew idiom. That means that destruction is now unavoidable, which is why Paul Simon's death will symbolize this. Okay, now back to what I was saying. 7 days after the sale of the mansion, owned by the producer of Seventh Heaven, and the day of the mass shooting, in which 4 people were killed, the manhunt for the shooter who killed the 4 people ended. Okay, so 7 days after the sale of the mansion owned by the producer of Seventh Heaven. Now, this 7 days later was 8/8, August 8th. And also on 8/8, this date, the 19-year-old, 19 is the 8th prime number, and 8 is equal to 4 plus 4. This 19-year-old, as an 18th prime number years old, on the date 8/8, slipped and fell off the roof of his NASCAR car, which was number 88. And he fell in front of the press cameras when he was celebrating in Victory Lane. It was notable that the winner of the race was only 19 years old, which gives us the other 8 there. The name Jesus in Greek is equal to 888 in Greek gematria, as in Victory Lane. Our victory is through Jesus. The 8th prime number of years old driver fell off of his number 88 car on the date 8/8, exactly 8 plus 8 weeks, before it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head. That's why the driver slipped and fell off of car number 88 on the date 8/8, because it's 8 plus 8 weeks exactly before the prediction of Paul Simon's fall. But there's more, because 8 plus 8 weeks is also 4 times 4 weeks, and Paul Simon's hit song, Slip, Slidin' Away, is from his, Slip, Slidin' Away, is from his 4th solo album that was released in 77. 7 days, like I mentioned earlier, 7th Heaven, 7 Psalms. On the same day, when the driver slipped off his car, number 88, on the date 8/8, it was reported that a water slide on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, as in the King of Rock, busted, and his mansion, busted when a man was sliding on it, which hints at Slip, Slidin' Away. That was released in 77. And this water slide on the busted ship, this water slide on the ship busted 7 days after the sale of the mansion owned by the producer of Seventh Heaven. Why all of this? Revelation 8:8 speaks of the destruction of ships. And this follows the sound of silence in heaven that is described in Revelation 8:1. Simon's first hit that launched his career was Sound of Silence, and Spelling's mansion sold on the date 8:1, exactly 37 months after the sale of Paul Simon's mansion. But let me just add this, because I explained it in the last video, the last paragraph, but I guess I have to explain it again. There are those that claim that America isn't mentioned in Bible prophecy, but they couldn't be more wrong. The destruction of ships in Revelation 8:8 is symbolic of America. And this is demonstrated to be true, for example, through Paul Simon, who is symbolism for America. Paul Simon has a hit song, America, and also a hit song, American Tune, and he sang right after 9/11, which was a warning for America to repent and turn back to God. Paul Simon is the American singer prophetically for God's signs. He's also considered to be the GOAT, greatest of all time, of American pop music composition, for example, too. Now, the destruction of ships in Revelation 8:8 follows the Sound of Silence, which is Paul Simon in Revelation 8:1. And now we're connecting 8 plus 8 weeks to the ship sign on the date 8:8, and the slip sliding off of the car number 88 by the 8th prime number years old driver. Now, the reason why the ships in Revelation 8:8 and their destruction is symbolic of the destruction of America is because a lot of Revelation prophecy in the book of Revelation is a parallel with prophecy in the Old Testament, including in Isaiah chapter 23, which speaks of the ships of Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish, and also judgment on ancient Tyre. Now, ancient Tyre is symbolic of America, because ancient Tyre's success and prosperity were a result of its natural protection by the ocean. It was an island off the coast in the Mediterranean, and it wasn't conquered until Alexander the Great built a causeway, a bridge, as in Paul Simon, bridge over troubled water, to Tyre and then conquered it. Likewise, Great Britain was separated from the rest of America to become a special culture for God's purposes, which birthed America, which was also protected by an ocean, or two oceans, as we know, which is a big reason for America's security and prosperity. Likewise with ancient or Great Britain. Now, Great Britain, we know from ancient evidence we know from evidence from ancient history that Tarshish was Great Britain, or is Great Britain. And the daughter of Tarshish would be America, because America was birthed by the culture of Great Britain. And so the ships of Tarshish in Isaiah chapter 23 and the ships of the daughter of Tarshish are reference to America and Great Britain, and this is how Great Britain became the dominant empire in the 19th century on which the sun never set, because of its naval power and its trading power through its ships. This is the thing about Great Britain that made it the success that it was. Likewise with America. Its naval power, which allows it to extend its power around the world anywhere through its aircraft carriers, etc. And of course, its immense trading power through its ships, its merchant navy, etc. So that's why Paul Simon, who symbolizes America and its connection to ships here, through its sliding away. It's absolutely amazing. Coincidentally, as I just said that, this segment of this video is now, it was just a second ago, exactly 8 plus 8 minutes, pretty much. This is merely scratching the surface of the reasons for how this prediction is known in advance. For more information, please visit odyssey.com, spelled ODYSEE.com, or rumble.com video channels titled Asteroid Prediction. And also read the website trumpprediction.com. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.